All right, welcome back to Double Fries Nose Slaw here with Clay Fink of Noles 247. Going to talk a little offensive line, some trench talk. I know that there's other stuff that's going on today. We're not ignoring that. We did a video on that earlier. If you want to whine and be miserable about a quarterback, you can go do that somewhere else on a different video. But today, in tonight's episode, we are going to talk about offensive line. Clay, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well. I'm excited for these new hires. It's reinvigorating a little bit.
Yeah, it's peaks and valleys, it's highs and lows, but it's like, hires, signing day, portal, good and bad.
Yeah.
And so it's just all the ups and downs, all the highs and lows, which is still better than the season, right? Because that was just all
Oh,
lows.
it was all lows. All lows.
So Florida State made it official today. Herb Hand, new offensive line coach. Let's maybe start from the beginning. I have a theory, and I want you to grade this theory. But maybe closing the book on Atkins before we go super far into Hand.
Yeah.
Atkins obviously did a pretty good job of turning a really bad offensive line into a good, an average offensive line. Like I think
Yeah.
2021, 2022 had pretty serviceable offensive lines, and then things kind of tailed off a little in 23, and then obviously we're pretty bad here in 24. Development was a question. Recruiting wasn't. I thought they did a good job of bringing in talented guys, but to me, when the fall off of Florida State's offensive line seemed to coincide with when Norvell was almost maybe forced into making Atkins into an offensive coordinator to keep him from going other places. And so it was kind of a darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? You can either lose him to somewhere else that will give him a title increase and more responsibility, or you can give him that title increase and responsibility and pay increase and all those things. And it almost was just like, man, it was a perfect storm of, I don't know that it could have worked out because, again, the offensive line started to take a decline once you did elevate him.
Right.
And so, I don't know. Is that a crazy theory? Like, to me, that just kind of is what is logical. Like, if Alex would have just been an offensive line coach forever at Florida State, it probably had a better chance of working out.
Yeah. So I think you're probably right, but I also think it's important to note that, watching practice, I cannot count on one hand the amount of times that I saw Alex Atkins interacting with non-offensive line offensive players. And there's very few, if any, recruitments that he was involved in for non-offensive line players on the offense. But with that said, I think he was somewhat implemented in game planning, and I do think that made an impact on his offensive line's play because, it took not a step back because you have better talent around them and certain numbers, the pass protection numbers in 2023, they were a great pass protecting offensive line, all things considered. Jordan gets you out of some sacks, but he also gets you into some sacks. That it's just kind of the name of the game when you have a quarterback with that play style. The pass pro was really solid last year. The run blocking took a major step back from 2022. Major step back. That was the staple of the offense. And I just kind of wonder if that was already facilitated and already set up for the run game to have success in 2022 before this move was made. And
Yeah.
I don't want to fully attribute it to that move, but I don't think it's impossible to rule out that it had a contribution to his regression.
Yeah. So with Herb Hand, with a change there, what is, if you had to, I know you've watched a lot of film, you've shared stuff on Twitter, which people can follow you there, and then obviously at Noles 247 for more kind of insight and content and stuff. But I know you're excited about some things with Hand. If you had to break down like what you're most excited about for Herb Hand taking over this offensive line group, what would that one thing be?
So a staple, a communication staple of offensive line coaches, something they love to say, and this has gone back to my high school offensive line coach. We work as a unit. We work as a unit. We're not one player. We're one unit. I think he lives by that. This guy, you look at the players that he's produced individually, and you look at their pro careers, you look at the accolades they earned in college. It's kind of underwhelming. But every single school that he's been at has had, at bare minimum, an above average rushing attack. And, Not all offensive line, but that's the easiest metric you can use to measure offensive line. Herb Hand, he's highly, highly regarded in the coaching world. Like, I've talked to six different. One is my high school coach, and five are graduate assistants who have all given incredible reviews of him as a teacher, as a mentor, what he does for his players. That guy, he's gonna get the offensive line unit right. Like, he will get them working together as a unit. I think one of the things that stood out in a lot of his clinics, especially in certain clinics where maybe he's with a guy who's more experienced than him, his go-to questions were, how can I make sure that the center and the guard are perfectly communicating this situation on a given snap and addressing it correctly. He's just he's just big on communication. He's big on technique. He's big on the entire O line is as great as their weakness. Um, I just really like his approach to offensive line coaching. I think he's and part of this is that he's been in the game for a long time, and there's a lot of clinics over the years that he's done. I think it's over a quarter of a century that he's coached offensive line play at the FBS level. But I mean, he's there's a video on basically anything that you could imagine offensive linemen need to work on. I mean, he's addressed everything. This guy is an offensive line mastermind on the field. I mean, there's people that he's probably a top 10 to 5 to 10 offensive line coach in the FBS, pound for
Yeah.
pound. What he's done with that UCF unit, obviously you have RJ Harvey in the backfield, but I mean, they had one draft pick last year, and he was a sixth rounder, and he was the first UCF offensive lineman drafted in like 13 years. That O line works as a unit. Texas, when he was there, O line worked as a unit. I think every starter in both years that he was there had some form of all Big 12 recognition. Uh, he started his career at Vanderbilt. His guards were a strength of the team, so he ran inside behind the guards. Penn State, the tackles were a strength of the team. He ran outside behind the tackles. Auburn, everything was the strength. Their O lines were great when he and Gus were there together. But I mean, he's just really good at getting the O line to work together. He might not produce these generational, elite players, but it's not like he hasn't shown the capability of doing that.
Yeah.
And something that some people I've seen have pointed out is in less years at UCF, I think one less year, compared to Alex Atkins at FSU, which obviously has a bigger brand. You're attracting more physically gifted offensive line recruits. He put a player or an offensive lineman in the draft and was a sixth-round pick, Tylen Grable. Atkins did not, with
Yeah.
an extra year and the brand benefit. So I think even if the selling point is the group working together as a whole, the individual player development still exceeds what we've seen in the past.
Obviously, there will be two parts to this. One will be, the idea of developing some of the good young talent that is on Florida State's roster now, and then talent they bring in the portal, over the next month or so. So there will be that side of it too, but then also the recruiting aspect of it, right? The idea of like all the places you just mentioned, Penn State, Texas,
Yeah,
Auburn, UCF, I know a newer addition to the Power Four, but more so probably at UCF due to working with Gus, right? Like would be my thought.
right,
Like
right, right,
probably could have worked in a bigger school the last
right.
4 years had he not been with his coach. But just so yeah, both sides of that. The develop like what are your kind of expectations for him with some of the young guys, or even some of the guys that have been here a year or two and haven't really seen the field yet, or haven't seen the field, in a super productive capacity, and then
Right.
the recruiting aspect too. Like, will there Alex recruited guys that were fairly highly rated? Could there be a drop off there, but then a better development down the road? Like, so
Right.
just both aspects, both development and recruiting, obviously big questions that people would have with any new hire.
Yeah, so I was a little bit more confident in his recruiting On my initial research, now that I've talked to a few more sources from his time at Auburn and his time at Texas, it and I experienced this as a UK fan. They did this. Our O line coach did this. Left us out to dry. No O line commits in December. But that's how he left Texas, and that's how he left Auburn. They had zero offensive line commits in early December, and were left on their own to, you know, you can imagine what it is like as an FSU fan without an offensive line coach. I mean, Solomon Thomas, it's tough to commit to a school without an offensive line coach. But imagine leaving that school with zero offensive line commits at the time. So
Yeah.
that's what he did at both Texas and Auburn. That's the concern from Texas and Auburn fans. They have a bad taste left in their mouth of Herb Hand because the last years he was there at both of their schools, he set them up for failure in the trenches. And that's not to say that he's a bad recruiter. I don't think he's a plus recruiter. I kind of did. But after hearing more, I think he's close. I think he's an average recruiter. And honestly, I loved Atkins. But I kind of think they're pretty similar level of recruiters, as in when Atkins wants to turn it on, when he wants to turn up the heat for a guy, he will get that guy. Think of Solomon Thomas, for example. I mean, those guys, they're basically mirror images of each other. And Atkins realized that very quickly and determined that this is a guy that I will spend all of my time recruiting. But there's other kids who have committed to FSU or who have been interested in FSU who he maybe hasn't or didn't show that same level of interest daily as he did to a Solomon type. And I just think the classes while Herb Hand was at Auburn and Texas, excluding his final classes, I mean, he was recruiting nothing spectacular, but he was recruiting 4-star. I think he has 1 5-star to his name. 4-star players, high 3-star players in his years at Auburn and his years at Texas. And I think the evaluation is a strength. He is a type. He likes, and this will be a little bit refreshing for FSU fans, he likes the big guys at any position. And I'm not talking heavy. I'm not talking 6'3", 340 pounds. I'm talking 6'7", 330 pounds. These, like Tylen Grable, his UCF offensive lineman who was drafted, it's a big, athletic dude. He has a profile that he wants to fit, and I don't think it's very similar to Alex Atkins' profile. Alex Atkins prioritized athleticism over length at tackle, and that's how you end up with 2 6'4" offensive tackles. Um, and granted, I think that Darius and Jeremiah Byers, in an ideal situation, can survive at tackle at the collegiate level. But is it sustainable to get these guys with a length disadvantage who are maybe a little bit more athletic? No. And so I think that this new archetype that Herb Hand has, and I think he does a good job of selling that's his thing, is that we get these big offensive linemen, not even just at tackle, maybe a 6'6", 6'5", 320 plus pound guard, 6'4", 6'5" center. He likes a big offensive line, and that's going to be refreshing for a lot of FSU fans who've, I mean, rightfully been complaining about the tackle play over the last few years being guys who should really play guard.
How quickly do you think? Because Florida State, maybe quick question? Where did Florida State grade out offensive line wise? Just kind of in general, like pretty
Yeah.
low toward the bottom of the Power Four.
Yeah. I think it was 90s to one out of 134 FBS teams. I don't remember Power Four, but out of 134, I want to say it was 90s to 100 in pass protection,
That's
and
got
it
to be
was
pretty
in
low.
the 120 to 130 range in run
Yeah,
blocking. So
it's got to
yeah,
be
the
pretty
run
low. And
blocking was the bigger weakness, but even if the pass, I mean, it was bad. It was
yeah,
awful.
both of them, even both of them being at 90 would have been probably pretty low in the Power Four, right? There's only
Uh,
50 something Power Four teams.
yeah.
And so that considered, how quickly now, obviously bringing guys into the portal will expedite things, right? If you were to go out and sign a really great prospect or a couple of
Right.
just plus prospects. They don't even have to be the most elite, right? Number one type target. The portal can impact this. So maybe I'm giving you an out to answer it. But how quickly can he develop the guys that are there, the clay that's already there on FSU's roster, whether they be guys like it's ITT guys that came in last year or guys that were, Simmons who's been here for two. How quickly can he get a unit to be pretty serviceable and just back to average, back to 50s when they grade out in college football?
Right. Yeah, I kind of think that's his strength, and I think that makes it even more important to retain maybe some guys who are first, second year players, maybe even third year players who haven't really done anything. Manasseh Tete, Jonathan Daniels, because UCF's offensive line typically had at least one underclassman starting, typically, or every year had at least one, if not more. If you, this is kind of what he specializes at. He loves these big bodies, and you're just not going to find a ton of those who. There's only so many guys who can play offensive line at this level. That's well documented. You have to be big, you have to be athletic, and you kind of have to dip into other countries to get that. And so a guy like Manasseh, a guy like Lucas Simmons, those are the body types, those are the stories that he's comfortable with. That's what he's kind of not relied upon. There's only so many of those guys, but he's made that a part of his DNA as a coach is you have these, guys who maybe didn't grow up even knowing anything about football, and I'm going to teach them to play offensive line because the physical traits are just that good. I think it's a big boost for guys like Manasseh. I think it's a big boost for Jonathan Daniels, Lucas Simmons, hell, even Jalen Early. He'll be a redshirt junior. But yeah, I mean, I, I I think he's really good at getting athletic potential out of players, and that was kind of his thing at UCF.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he can turn it around quick. Not quick. Turn it around. By turn it around, I mean get back to average. That is
Yeah.
what you are shooting for in this first year because you can make an argument this offensive line was worse than the 2018, 2019 FSU offensive lines. It's just get to average.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could have, yeah, honestly, like if your offensive line was just average this year, you probably make a bowl, right?
Yeah,
Like you
probably.
probably beat Georgia Tech or,
Yeah,
split with Memphis and Boston College, beat Duke. You probably just win a couple more based on that
right.
alone. So,
Easily.
with recruiting, you mentioned his name, but there was some. I mean, Zach reported on this. Zach Blostein, Knowles 247 reported that it would have been really important. It would have been really big to have an offensive line coach for Solomon Thomas. Do you think that? And it seemed like Herb Hand's name was mentioned a ton. And I don't want to make you speculate so much on what a recruit would have done had a hire happened fast. But
Yeah.
was Norvell looking for something else? Was he trying to get somebody else? What was the delay there? Like, why was he not just announced right after? It seemed like that would be such a natural flow, natural fit.
Right.
Would it have changed things with Thomas? Like, would having somebody in for 2 days made a difference there? Like, just why is this now coming out today instead of a week ago today?
So to start, why it's coming out today, I think he was interested in Scott Frost, from what I've heard. I'm not the totally plugged in guy, but it sounds like he wanted to entertain the idea of returning to UCF after they hired Scott Frost. It sounded like he maybe had interest from other programs, maybe not quite on FSU's level, but around FSU's level. Um, and so something that we assumed would maybe be a done deal became a little bit more complicated because he had other options coming his way. Um, as far as Solomon Thomas, I think if Herb Hand was so signing day was Wednesday. Um, I transcribed a article from interview from Solomon. I want to say Friday before signing day, so 5 days in advance, and he straight up he told us if they set a coach especially before Wednesday. I might wait until after Wednesday to sign because I
Right.
want to get in contact with that coach. He didn't care about the offensive coordinator. Gus getting hired 4 days in advance of signing did not impact Solomon. He cared about his offensive line coach. Um, and yeah, I don't think it's ridiculous to say that if Gus had brought in Herb Hand as his offensive line coach on even Monday at noon, for example, you've got you've got 48 hours at bare minimum
Yeah.
to try and develop a relationship as Herb Hand with Solomon. Because Solomon, I mean, he's an Atkins guy. Don't get me wrong. That is the reason that he was committed to FSU throughout a 2-10 season. He and Atkins are mirror images of each other. But he loves Norvell. Like that's why he didn't decommit as soon as Atkins got fired. Like it's not just Atkins. He
No.
wanted to give Norvell the chance, from what I understand. And for whatever reason, the Herb Hand hiring didn't really go through early last week. Sounded like he was entertaining other options, and yeah, I think if they had landed Herb Hand and gave him 48 hours to really get to know Solomon, I think things would look a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, one, we won't, we'll try not to cry too much over one recruit. I don't know that one, now, you mentioned it, working as a unit. So maybe silver lining, like,
Right,
I
right.
don't know that one recruit is going to
Yeah.
sink the offensive line, but I do think that it certainly would have been nice to have, like nobody would have complained. Maybe
No,
even
no.
bumped your class up from, 19 to around 15 and you
Yeah,
can.
you could probably push for the top 15 with Solomon.
The last thing I'll ask you, and then we'll wrap up. But just the ability to work well with Gus. I know people are really really excited about Tony White and Knighton, and then you bring in a safeties coach. It sounds like you may retain Sertan. I think people are excited about Hand somewhat. Maybe they're a little less excited about the Gus hire just because of uncertainty. It's been a while, but without what do you think just the pro of him working with Gus and Gus being a running first type guy? Norvell likes to run first. Like that's
Yeah,
always kind of been what he wanted to do too. And so the does the Herb Hand hire, no matter what your thoughts were on Gus, if you rated that 1 to 10, no matter what number you were at, does it make you like the Gus hire even more?
easily, absolutely. I wouldn't say I've gotten as positive, as glowing of reviews of Herb Hand as I have Terrence Knighton, the defensive line coach, for example. The I mean, as soon as I posted that, I was getting messages from Nebraska writers telling me this guy is next. Like he's going to be a defensive coordinator. I wouldn't be shocked if Terrence Knighton's only here for a handful of years. Um, Herb Hand is a little bit different because he's older. He's not viewed as like a rising star, but that's kind of what you need on the offensive side, you know? And this has been well documented in articles and stuff, but you let Norvell be the head coach of the offense, that takes away from his time to recruit the entire roster, his time to make game management decisions in games. Um, and you hire a 59, I think, year old offensive coordinator with multiple years of head coach experience, high level head coach experience. And then you hire this offensive line coach who's, I mean, he's got some slight recruiting concerns, but he is a regarded as a high level developer across the country. I mean, I wouldn't give him quite as big of a boost as I would Tony White for landing Terrence Knighton, but I mean, say Gus was a 7, I'd take this to like an 8.5,
Hmm.
9 with Herb. I think that's a big time pickup. I think, especially coming off of the offensive line coach you had last year, who maybe excelled in recruiting when he really wanted to, but didn't really excel in development. Herb is the opposite a little bit. So I love the hire.
Clay, where can people follow you, man, on Twitter? Where can they check out your work when you do it on Knowles 247?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Clay _Fink on Twitter. You can. head to noles247.com, search up Clay Fink, find some of my articles. So
Awesome. I appreciate you, man, for hanging out. Excited about the hire too, and I appreciate your time, bro.
appreciate you having me.